The first thing I remember after waking up is the white. White walls, white sheets, white fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like trapped insects trying to escape. My head felt like it had been split open and badly glued back together, the kind of pain that makes you nauseous just thinking about moving. There was a sharp, persistent ache behind my left eye, and when I tried to shift my position even slightly, my neck screamed in protest, sending hot waves of agony down my spine. "Mrs. Voss, can you hear me?" A woman's voice, calm and clinical, the kind of voice that had delivered bad news before and learned how to soften the edges. I blinked, trying to focus through the haze of pain and medication. A nurse stood beside my bed, holding a chart with papers clipped to it. She had kind eyes, the sort of eyes that had seen too much suffering and still managed to stay soft, still managed to care. "Where am I?" My voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper, like I hadn't used it in days. "You're at Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C., she said, moving closer to check the monitors beside my bed. "You were brought in last night around 11:30. You suffered a significant head injury. Do you remember what happened?" I did. I remembered everything with the kind of brutal clarity that trauma sometimes brings. The argument in our kitchen in Arlington, the one that had started over something small, something stupid. I'd asked David about a charge on our credit card, a restaurant I didn't recognize. His face had changed so fast, like a switch being flipped. The way his features twisted with rage, his eyes going dark and cold. The feel of his hand connecting with the side of my head, so hard that I'd heard a ringing sound before the pain even registered. The sensation of falling, the world tilting sideways. The sharp edge of the marble countertop catching me on the way down. The cold floor against my cheek, smooth and hard. The taste of blood in my mouth, metallic and warm. But I looked at the nurse and I said, "No, I don't remember anything." It wasn't a plan. Not at first. It was instinct. Some deep, primal part of me that knew I needed time, needed space, needed to figure out what to do next. The part of me that had learned over the years to be careful, to think before speaking, to protect myself in ways I hadn't even fully acknowledged until that moment. So I lied. "You don't remember the fall?" the nurse asked, her brow furrowing with concern. She made a note on her chart, her pen moving quickly across the paper. "I don't remember anything," I said again, and this time I let my voice shake a little, let the fear show. "I don't even know how I got here. Did I have an accident?" The nurse's expression softened even more. "That's not uncommon with head trauma, especially with the severity of your injury. The doctor will want to run some tests. I'll let him know you're awake." She paused, setting the chart down on the rolling table beside the bed. "Your husband is outside. He's been here all night, hasn't left once. Should I send him in?" My stomach turned, a wave of nausea rolling through me. For a moment, I thought I might actually be sick, but I swallowed it down and nodded. "Okay." She left, her shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor, and I had maybe 30 seconds to prepare myself before David walked through the door. He looked terrible. His hair was a mess, standing up in places like he'd been running his hands through it all night. His eyes were red-rimmed and swollen, whether from tears or exhaustion I couldn't tell. His shirt was wrinkled, the same shirt he'd been wearing during the argument, and there was a small stain on the collar that might have been coffee or might have been my blood. He rushed to my side, reaching for my hand with both of his. "Lily, thank God. I've been so worried. They wouldn't let me see you until you woke up, and the doctors kept saying they didn't know when that would be, and I just—" His voice broke, and he pressed my hand against his cheek. "I thought I'd lost you." I pulled my hand back slightly, Not too much, just enough to seem confused rather than repulsed. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" His face went pale, all the color draining out of it in an instant. His hands dropped to his sides. "Lily, it's me, David, your husband." I stared at him, keeping my expression blank, fighting every instinct that told me to scream at him, to tell the nurse what really happened, to have him arrested on the spot. But I knew David. I'd lived with him for 6 years, loved him for most of that time, and learned to fear him in the last year. I knew that if I accused him now, he'd have an explanation. He'd have a story. He'd make it sound like I was confused, like I was unstable, like maybe I'd hurt myself and couldn't remember. And people would believe him because David was good at making people believe him. "My husband?" I repeated, letting confusion color my voice. "Yes," he said, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "We've been married for 6 years. We have a house in Arlington. You really don't remember?" I shook my head slowly, wincing at the pain the movement caused. It wasn't entirely fake. "I don't remember anything. The nurse said I hit my head, but I don't know how it happened. I don't remember yesterday or the day before or anything recent." David sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, running his hands through his hair again. He looked genuinely shaken, and part of me, the part that had loved him for so long, wanted to feel sorry for him. But then I remembered the sound of his hand hitting my face, the way he'd stood over me afterward, shouting that it was my fault, that I'd pushed him too far, that I should have known better than to question him. And that tiny spark of sympathy died. "You fell," he said finally, and I watched his face carefully as he constructed the lie. "In the kitchen. You must have slipped on something, maybe some water on the floor. I found you unconscious and called 911 immediately. The ambulance got there so fast, thank God. They said you'd hit your head on the counter on the way down." I let the lie sit there between us, heavy and ugly. I didn't challenge it. I just nodded, as if I believed him, as if I had no choice but to believe him because I couldn't remember anything else. The doctor came in a little while later, a middle-aged man with glasses and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me on edge. His name tag said, Dr. Richard Foster. He asked me a series of questions, testing my memory, checking my cognitive function. I answered some and pretended not to know others. I said I didn't remember my address, my job, or how I'd ended up in the hospital. But I made sure to remember basic things, like my name, the current year, who the president was, so it seemed believable. I'd done some research on amnesia years ago for a freelance article I'd written, and I drew on that knowledge now, making sure my memory loss seemed consistent with retrograde amnesia. "Retrograde amnesia," Dr. Foster said to David, his tone measured and professional. "It's not uncommon with this type of injury, especially given the location and severity of the impact. The CT scan showed some swelling but no bleeding, which is good news. Her memories may come back over time, either gradually or all at once, or they may not come back at all. There's no way to predict it with certainty." David nodded, playing the part of the concerned husband so perfectly I almost believed it myself. "Whatever she needs, doctor. I just want her to be okay. What can we do to help her?" "Rest, primarily," Dr. Foster said. "We'll keep her here for observation, for at least another 48 hours, make sure the swelling goes down and there are no complications. After that, she'll need a calm environment at home, no stress, plenty of sleep. We'll schedule follow-up appointments to monitor her progress." "Of course," David said. "Anything." They kept me in the hospital for 3 more days. During that time, David barely left my side. He brought me flowers, white roses that filled the room with their scent. He brought magazines, though I pretended I couldn't focus enough to read them. He brought my favorite snacks from the vending machine, chocolate-covered almonds and ginger ale. He told me stories about our life together, trying to jog my memory, painting a picture of a perfect marriage that had never existed. He talked about how we'd met at a tech conference in Boston in 2016. He was there representing his consulting firm, and I was covering the event for a marketing blog. He said he'd seen me taking notes in the back of a presentation room and had been struck by how focused I looked, how intelligent. He'd approached me during a coffee break, and we'd ended up talking for 2 hours, missing half the conference. He proposed on a beach, in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, getting down on one knee at sunset while a handful of strangers applauded. We'd bought our house in Arlington just before the pandemic hit, a small 2-bedroom place with a backyard full of azaleas. Some of it was true. The broad strokes were accurate. But he left out so much. He didn't mention the way he'd slowly isolated me from my friends over the years, always finding reasons why we couldn't meet up with them, why they weren't good influences, why I was better off focusing on our relationship. He didn't mention the way he monitored my phone, checking my messages and calls, asking who I'd been talking to and why. He didn't mention the first time he'd shoved me, 3 years into our marriage, or the first time he'd slapped me just over a year ago. He didn't mention any of the times he'd apologized afterward, crying and swearing it would never happen again, and how I'd believed him every single time until I couldn't anymore. I listened, and I pretended to be interested, even touched by his devotion. But inside, I was watching him, studying him, waiting. Because I knew David, I knew that underneath the charm and the concern, there was something else, something dark and volatile that he kept locked away until he couldn't control it anymore. And I knew that if I was patient, if I played this right, he would slip up. He would reveal himself. On the second night, after visiting hours ended and he'd finally gone home to shower and change clothes, a social worker came to see me. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she had a gentle manner that put me at ease immediately. She asked how I was feeling, how I was coping with the memory loss, whether I needed anything. And then she asked very carefully, "Mrs. Voss, do you feel safe at home?" I looked at her kind face and concerned eyes, and I knew she suspected something. Maybe she'd seen cases like this before. Maybe something about David's behavior had raised a red flag. But I also knew that if I told her the truth now, without proof, it would be my word against his. And David was a consultant for a prestigious firm, well-respected and articulate. I was a freelance writer with a head injury and supposedly no memory of what had actually happened. So I said, "I think so. I mean, I don't remember much, but David seems like he cares about me." Patricia nodded slowly. "If you ever need to talk, or if you remember anything that concerns you, you can call me anytime." She handed me a card with her contact information. "Day or night?" I took the card and tucked it under my pillow. "Thank you." When they finally discharged me on the 4th day, David drove me home. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered it, a modest 2-story colonial with pale blue siding and white trim. The azaleas in the front yard were blooming, bright pink against the spring green of the lawn. But walking inside felt different, like stepping into a crime scene that had been carefully cleaned. David had done exactly that. The kitchen was spotless. The blood was gone from the marble countertops, scrubbed away so thoroughly that they gleamed in the afternoon light. The floor had been mopped until it shone. He'd even put fresh flowers on the table, white lilies this time, my favorite. It was almost sweet if you didn't know what he was covering up. "I thought we'd take it slow," he said, helping me to the couch in the living room. "You should rest as much as possible. Doctor's orders." I nodded, sinking into the cushions. My head still ached, though the pain had dulled to a manageable throb. "Thank you for taking care of me." He sat beside me, too close, and took my hand in both of his. "I know this is hard, Lily. I can't imagine what it's like to wake up and not remember your own life. But we'll get through it together. I'll help you remember everything." I looked at him, at his earnest expression and hopeful eyes, and I said, "I'm lucky to have you." He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that might have fooled anyone else. But I saw the relief in his eyes, the way his shoulders relaxed, the subtle exhale of tension. He thought he'd gotten away with it. He thought I had no idea what he'd done. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I asked questions about our life, about his job as a technology consultant, about my work as a freelance writer. I let him show me around the house as if I'd never seen it before, pointing out photos on the walls, telling me the stories behind them. I let him explain our routines, where we kept things, what we usually did on weekends. And I watched. I paid attention to everything, the way he relaxed more each day, growing confident that I really didn't remember, the way he started leaving his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, the way he stopped being quite so careful with his words. But at night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him on the phone. The first time was 6 days after I came home from the hospital. I was lying in our bed, my eyes closed, my breathing slow and even. David was in the bathroom with the door cracked open just enough for me to hear his voice. "She doesn't remember anything," he said quietly. "Yeah, I know. The doctor said it might be permanent. I got so lucky." There was a pause, and I imagined whoever he was talking to on the other end. "No, I didn't mean to hit her that hard," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "She just wouldn't shut up about the credit card bill. She kept pushing and pushing, saying I was hiding something, accusing me of seeing someone else. I lost my temper. It was an accident." Another pause. "I'm not worried. She completely believes the story about falling. She thinks I'm this devoted husband taking care of her. It's actually kind of pathetic how trusting she is." I kept my breathing steady, my body completely still. Inside, I was burning with rage so intense it took everything I had not to get up and confront him right then. But I knew that would be a mistake. I needed more. I needed proof. "Listen, I need to go," David said. "I'll call you tomorrow. Love you too." Love you too. He was talking to someone he loved, someone who wasn't me. The next morning, I started looking for evidence. I had to be careful, had to make sure David didn't know I was snooping. So I waited until he left for work, claiming I had a meeting with a client that would take most of the day. I started with his office, a small room on the second floor that he always kept locked when he wasn't using it. I'd never had a key, but I'd watched him enough over the years to know he kept the spare in a lockbox in the hall closet. The code was our wedding anniversary, the one date he'd always been able to remember. It took me 3 tries because my hands were shaking so badly, but I got the lockbox open and found the key. His office was obsessively organized, everything in its place, files labeled and color-coded. I started with his desk, carefully going through the drawers. I found bank statements, investment portfolios, insurance documents, and as I read through them, my blood ran cold. David had been stealing from me. For the past 2 years, he'd been systematically siphoning money from our joint account into a private account I didn't know existed. It had started small, a few $100s here and there, but over time, the amounts had grown. 500, 1,000, 2,000. He'd been careful, spacing the withdrawals out, making them look like legitimate expenses. Groceries, gas, home repairs, medical bills. All of it had been funneled into an account at a different bank under his name only. The total was staggering, $63,000. Money I'd earned from my freelance work, money I'd saved carefully, gone. And there was more. I found emails printed out and filed away in a folder labeled personal. They were between David and a woman named Brooke Henderson. The emails were careful, never explicit, but the tone was unmistakable. They talked about meeting for coffee, about how much they'd enjoyed their time together, about how complicated things were, but how worth it she was. The most recent email was from 3 days before David had hit me, and it made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped the paper. "I can't wait until we don't have to hide anymore," Brooke had written. "I know it's complicated with Elle, but you said you were working on it. I believe in us, Dee. We're worth fighting for." Elle. That was me. Lily. The obstacle standing in the way of their happiness. I took photos of everything with my phone, my hands trembling. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, made sure the office was locked, and returned the key to the lockbox. That night, I started planning in earnest. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. I had no proof of the assault beyond my own word, and David would just claim I was confused because of the amnesia. He'd say I fell, just like he'd been saying all along, and without my memory, there was no way to prove otherwise. But I had proof of the financial theft, and that was a start. I reached out to a lawyer using an encrypted email account I created on a tablet I'd hidden in the back of my closet. Her name was Sandra Liu, and she specialized in family law and fraud cases. I'd found her through careful research, reading reviews, and looking for someone with experience handling cases like mine. I explained the situation, sent her the photos I'd taken from David's office, and asked for her advice. She responded within 2 hours. "This is bad, but it's also actionable. What he's doing is financial abuse and theft. If you want to move forward, we can build a case, but you need to be smart about it. Don't let him know you remember anything or suspect anything until we're ready to move. Gather as much evidence as you can. Document everything." "I will," I wrote back. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I recorded conversations with David using my phone hidden in my pocket. I documented every lie, every manipulation, every time he told me a story about our past that I knew wasn't quite true. I took more photos of financial documents when he wasn't home. I even managed to access his computer one afternoon while he was on a conference call in another room, downloading emails and files onto a flash drive. And I found more evidence of Brooke. She worked at the same consulting firm as David in the sales department. She was 32, blonde, always posting on Instagram about her perfect life and her amazing career. In several photos, David was visible in the background, always watching her, always smiling. I also found text messages. David had an old phone in his desk drawer, one he must have thought he'd hidden well enough. The messages between him and Brooke went back almost 2 years. They talked about their relationship, about how in love they were, about their plans for the future once David dealt with the Lily situation. That phrase made my stomach turn. The Lily situation. That's what I was to them. A problem to be solved. The most damning messages were from the week before the assault. Brooke had been pushing David to leave me, to file for divorce, to stop dragging things out. David had responded that it wasn't that simple, that I'd fight him on everything, that he needed to find a way to make it easier. "What if something happened to her?" Brooke had written. "I don't mean anything permanent, just something that made her less able to fight." "Like what?" David had responded. "I don't know. An accident, maybe. Something that left her vulnerable." The next message from David had come 2 days before he hit me. "Working on it." I stared at those messages for a long time, my heart pounding. This wasn't just an assault, it was premeditated. They'd discussed ways to hurt me, to make me vulnerable, and then David had done exactly that. I took photos of every message and sent them to Sandra. Her response was immediate. "This changes everything. This isn't just domestic violence, it's conspiracy. You need to take this to the police now. We have enough. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed one more piece of evidence. I needed David to confess on tape. I waited for the right moment. It came on a Friday night, 3 weeks after I'd been released from the hospital. David had been drinking, something he'd been doing more often lately. He was on his 3rd glass of whiskey, sitting on the couch watching television while I pretended to read a book. "You know, Lily," he said, his words slightly slurred, "this whole amnesia thing has actually been kind of a blessing." I looked up from my book, keeping my expression neutral and curious. "What do you mean?" He laughed, a bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. "I mean, I thought I was done when you hit your head. I thought you'd wake up and tell the doctors what really happened and I'd be arrested. But you didn't. You don't even remember. And now I don't have to deal with all your paranoid accusations anymore." I set my book down carefully, my phone recording in my pocket. "Accusations about what?" He waved his glass dismissively. "About the money, about Brooke, about everything. You were always so suspicious, always questioning me, always making me feel like I was doing something wrong. It was exhausting." "Who's Brooke?" I asked softly. "She's nobody," he said, but his face told a different story. "Just someone from work, but you were convinced I was having an affair, that I was hiding money from you. You wouldn't let it go. That's why things got so bad." "Bad how?" I pressed. He leaned back against the couch, closing his eyes. "That's why I hit you. I didn't mean to hit you so hard. But you just kept pushing. You kept saying you'd checked the credit card bills, that you knew I was lying. You threatened to call a lawyer, to file for divorce. I couldn't let you do that." My heart was racing, but I kept my voice calm. "Why not?" "Because I'd lose everything," he said, opening his eyes to look at me. "The house, the money, my reputation. Brooke wouldn't stay with me if I was broke and disgraced, so I had to shut you up. I just didn't think you'd hit the counter so hard when you fell." There it was, the confession I needed. "So, you did hit me," I said quietly. He blinked, seeming to realize what he'd just admitted. "No, I mean, you fell. You hit your head when you fell." "After you hit me," I said. He sat up straighter, his eyes narrowing. "You said you don't remember." "I lied," I said, and pulled my phone out of my pocket, stopping the recording. "I remember everything, David, and I've been recording you for the past 3 weeks. His face went from pale to red in an instant. "You what?" "I know about Brooke. I know about the money you stole. I know about the texts where you two discussed ways to hurt me. And I have proof of all of it." He stood up, and for a moment I thought he might try to hit me again. But I stood too, holding my ground. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I've protected myself. And tomorrow I'm going to the police." He took a step toward me, but I held up my phone. "Sandra Lou has copies of everything. If something happens to me, it all goes straight to the police. You're done, David." He stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the house. I stood there in the living room, listening to his car start and drive away. Then I sat down on the couch and called Sandra. "It's time," I said. We filed the paperwork the next morning: divorce, fraud charges, assault charges, and a restraining order. Sandra had also contacted a detective she knew at the Arlington Police Department, someone who specialized in domestic violence cases. The detective, a woman named Maria Santos, met with me that afternoon. I showed her everything: the recordings, the photos, the financial documents, the text messages. I told her about the assault, about the amnesia I'd faked, about everything I'd uncovered. Detective Santos listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she looked at me with something like admiration. "Mrs. Voss, what you did took incredible courage and intelligence. Most victims don't have the presence of mind to gather this kind of evidence." "I didn't know what else to do," I said. "I knew if I accused him without proof, no one would believe me." "We believe you," she said firmly, "and we're going to make sure he pays for what he did." The police arrested David that evening at Brooke's apartment. He'd gone straight there after leaving our house, and according to Detective Santos, he'd been in the middle of packing a bag when they showed up. They arrested Brooke, too, charging her as an accessory for her role in planning the assault. The trial took 8 months. David hired an expensive lawyer, one of the best defense attorneys in Northern Virginia, and they fought hard. They tried to claim I'd fabricated everything, that the amnesia had been real and I'd become confused and paranoid afterward. They tried to discredit the recordings, saying they'd been edited or taken out of context. But the evidence was overwhelming. The financial records showed clear patterns of theft. The text messages between David and Brooke laid out their conspiracy in black and white. The recordings of David's confession were clear and unambiguous. Even his own lawyer seemed to know it was hopeless. The witnesses helped too. Patricia Chen, the social worker from the hospital, testified that she'd suspected domestic violence from the beginning. Dr. Foster testified about the severity and location of my injuries, which were consistent with being struck rather than simply falling. Colleagues from David's firm testified about his relationship with Brooke, confirming they'd been having an affair. And I testified. I told the jury everything, from the beginning of the abuse to the night he hit me to the weeks I spent gathering evidence. I looked David in the eye while I spoke, and I didn't look away. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, David was sentenced to 5 years in prison for assault and fraud. Brooke got 2 years as an accessory. They both lost their jobs, their reputations destroyed. David was also ordered to pay restitution for all the money he'd stolen, plus damages for medical bills and emotional distress. I got the house, full ownership after the divorce was finalized. I got my money back, or most of it, and I got my freedom. It took me a long time to feel safe again. For months after the trial, I jumped at sudden noises. I had nightmares about David coming back, about him finding a way to hurt me again. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Helen Park, who specialized in trauma recovery. She helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just domestic violence. It was a calculated campaign of abuse and control that had nearly destroyed me. But I was stronger than David had ever imagined. I'd survived, I'd fought back, and I'd won. I stayed in the house, the one in Arlington with the blue siding and the azaleas. At first, I thought about selling it, starting completely fresh somewhere new. But the longer I stayed, the more it started to feel like mine. I repainted the walls, choosing colors I loved instead of the neutral tones David had insisted on. I replaced the marble countertops in the kitchen with butcher block, warm and scarred and nothing like the cold surface I'd hit when I fell. I planted a garden in the backyard, filling it with vegetables and herbs and flowers that attracted butterflies. I built a life that was entirely my own. On a cold afternoon in late March, almost 2 years after David had hit me, I stood in my kitchen making tea. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, warming the butcher block counters. I could see my garden through the back door, still mostly dormant, but showing the first signs of spring. Tiny green shoots pushing through the soil, determined to grow. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, the one who'd woken up in a hospital bed and made a split-second decision to pretend she couldn't remember. The one who'd been so scared and hurt and lost. And I thought about the woman I was now, standing in her own kitchen, in her own house, strong and free and safe. I didn't need revenge. Revenge was loud and angry and ultimately hollow. What I needed was justice, and I'd gotten it. What I needed was freedom, and I'd claimed it. What I needed was to know that I could survive anything, and I'd proven it. The tea kettle whistled, and I poured hot water over chamomile and honey. I took my cup and went to sit by the window, looking out at the world I'd rebuilt from nothing. And I was at peace.